Well, hi everyone, and greetings from Northern Michigan. This is Bob the Science Guy, and I'm back. Now, today we're doing the third episode of Make Tartaria Great Again. In the first two episodes, we introduced this concept of a lost Atlantean Tartan civilization and a great mud flood around 1840. We talked about this concept of an orphan train, where foundlings and orphans from the cities were moved out west to the country, and how that was a social program in the mid to late 1800s. However, that apparently is being presented as evidence that all the adults were knocked off so that they didn't know any of the history. So today we're going to discuss the concept of ancient electricity and found cities. So join me as we have a look at Tartaria and ancient technology.
But I think it's extremely interesting, the volume of children that were being shipped around the world and the evidence that exists all around the world to indicate that there was a civilization prior to this one not too long ago, and this current civilization simply moved in and took over the real estate.
Now he's referring to two different things here. The first one is the orphan train. The orphan train movement was in the United States in the late 1800s. It was sponsored by churches, and the idea was we're going to get orphans from the inner city out to the fresh air and hard work and God-fearing families of the West. It continued on into the 20s. My grandmother remembers it. There was nothing mysterious about it. You know, the next is a good example of a classic begging the question fallacy. Now, he makes the assertion that people just moved into North America and found all these cities, or moved into Australia and found all of these existing cities and just took them over. And he's making that a fact with no supporting evidence. And he's expecting you to believe it simply because he said it. And by the way, this thing here is this is a pretty classic star fort. This is how they built military fortifications in the 1700s. You'll find examples of this all over the world. We know when it was built, we know why it was built, and we know who built it.
And when I say real estate, what I mean is not just the real estate, but also many of the buildings. And as I've said before, folks, really when you look at our cities, there's no way these cities were built by us. Some of the architecture...
Well, I don't know if I necessarily agree with that because we can date Rome and it was pretty advanced. As a matter of fact, in Rome, they provided more fresh water per person than most modern cities.
By us. Some of the architecture is just too old. Some of the architecture is just too complicated by our standards. How do we ever do any of this stuff? I mean, we certainly can't do it today.
Oh, really? Well, this is built more in North Carolina, and it was built in the late 19th century. It's contemporary to the fireplace that he's using as his illustration. This is just the style that they built them.
And some of the architecture here in Australia, it's not possible for the settlers to have built this. They simply wouldn't have had the machinery to be able to quarry the stones to build these huge government buildings, which are very old buildings. We've got buildings here that have been here since the late 1700s, and yet this country is supposed to have been colonised in 1770.
Except that's not really true, is it? Now, the Dutch were up in the northern part of New Holland or Australia in the 17th century. The English started exploring mostly the east coast and didn't circumnavigate Australia until about 1803. Now, the first prisoners arrived at the penal colony in Botany Bay about 1788. This is modern-day Sydney. As you can tell, there's no city there. The only people that were there before Cook and the other Europeans came were the Aborigines, who were a rather content and happy people, and of course the Europeans took care of that. Well, thank God in this day and age, big nations don't try and take over small nations without bothering to ask the people that lived there first. As a typical American green one, I want to tell you from the bottom of my heart that we deeply appreciate you as an independent nation. And thank you very much for letting us use that airbase. I don't know what this all came from, but if I could make a suggestion, you might want to consider building a wall.
1778, we've got cities. By the early 1800s, we've got huge cities, and it's just not possible for these cities to have been built in that time. And evidence would suggest that they weren't built in that time. They were already here.
Well, no, man. there weren't huge cities there in 1778. This is 1778 Sydney. I don't see an opera house there. I see tents and trees.
We just simply cleaned them up and moved in and took over the real estate.
Well, I hate to break it to you, but I actually researched this. What were the oldest buildings in each of the states of Australia? Here they are. The oldest is from 1793. Most came from the 1820s and the 1830s. In one case, the oldest building in Perth, I believe it is from 1870. There were no cities there. These are very simple structures. That one down in the lower right corner, is a shack. These are not elaborate Victorian era buildings, which is what you're putting up. These are very simple structures.
And of course, when you consider that, then you've got to ask the question, well, what happened to all the people that were in the cities before we came and did the cleanup?
Well, no, we're not wondering what happened to all the people because you haven't established that this has even occurred. This is a begging the question fallacy. You simply made a statement that this happened and assumed that we'll all accept that it's true. Well, we're not, Sonny Jim. We're not.
Some of the technology that exists in these old buildings, and a lot of them, as I've said before, some of the buildings like churches and some of these very, very complex structures you see around the place, they don't really look like buildings. They look like they're machines. They look like they're energy gathering machines. And I think all buildings were designed to actually gather energy.
Well, shoot, this ought to be good. An energy generating machine? Okay. Obviously, he's talking about this 12th century French cathedral, Notre Dame. And one of the features that he was pointing to was that spire. Now, that spire was constructed in the 19th century out of wood, as we found out in the recent fire.
A lot of these structures were designed with that in mind. And they were designed to harvest energy from the surrounding field. I know it sounds a little outrageous, but there's every indication this is what was going on.
No, Chief, there's zero indication that that's what's going on. These are fireworks. You can see the mortars they're shooting them off of.
Have you looked at some of the old fireplaces in some of the very old buildings? They don't seem very conducive to burning actual fires in there. Some of them are extremely shallow and don't appear to have chimneys attached to them.
All right, Slick, I'm going to have to stop you right there for a second. First of all, today most fireplaces in homes are pretty much ornamental and they're there for the ambiance. But back in the day, they actually provided heat to rooms. Now, this is a Rumford fireplace. This was designed specifically to heat rooms. And there's a couple of features that I want to point out on it. First of all, you notice that there is a chimney and then there's a flue. Once you don't use these fireplaces anymore, you seal off the flue so it doesn't appear as if there is a chimney, but there is one in the back and it goes up to the roof. Second is this. These fireplaces were wide, but very narrow. So for example, you've got a fireplace over here that's got a mouth on it that's almost 4 feet wide, but it's only 1.4 inches deep, 16 inches deep. That's because they wanted to project the heat into the room rather than up the chimney. This was designed for efficiency of heating. And these are very common in older homes.
No sort of place to actually build the fire. Very strange looking fireplaces. They seem to be connected to a metal type of device, some sort of a metal railing that runs around them. And there's always these two items, like two urns or two little spires that sit at the front of the fireplace. And there's always a metal plate at the back.
Oh, dear God, did you do any research at all for this? Do you not know what an andiron is? Now, these are very basic examples of andirons. As you can see, it's an L-shaped bracket that's high in the front. You put the logs on the back of the bracket and light your fire. The high fronts keep the fire from falling into your living room. Sometimes you might even put a little rail around it or a screen of some sort. Now, okay, since apparently you've never seen a working fireplace in your life, let me see if I can help you out a little bit. This is a typical fireplace. You have a little broom to dust off ash. You have a couple little poker tools to make the fire bigger. You've got a set of andirons, which is what you build the fire on, and in the back you have something called a fireback. A fireback is a metal plate set at an angle that is designed to heat up and radiate heat out into the room. They've been used since the 1400s. Tell me you know what a fireback is.
Perhaps these two metal objects at the front combined in perhaps some sort of positive negative energy field and projected some sort of a beam onto the metal plate at the back, or some sort of energy onto the plate, and the plate itself was what heated up and heated the room.
Really? A beam? Have you ever even seen a working fireplace? Ever? Really?
Getting a lot of people sending me information out of Russia, which has been really good, so keep that up. And there's also a Russian website that has noticed this and is suggesting that this is a possibility as well. And a lot of these old fireplaces, they've got these setups, folks, and they really don't look very conducive to burning wood. And again, you look at the copper tops of a lot of these buildings and these devices that are all constructed on top of them, you've really got to wonder why they're there. Are they just there for decoration, or is there a higher function to some of these things?
Hey guys, before we go much further, let me just introduce you to Biltmore. This is a Vanderbilt mansion in North Carolina. It's the largest private home in North America. I'll tell you, during the Gilded Age, subtle was not really a word they knew well.
There's a building in Florida called the Ponce de Leon Hotel, which has got a very interesting device on top of it. And it looks like it's just some decorative thing, but when you look at the building, this device is very unusually shaped and it's made of metal. And it's quite an intricate little device as well, and it's not exactly in a position where people are going to be viewing it. So what's it doing there? And why go to all the trouble to make something so incredibly decorative and to put it up in the center of the roof? And this is quite a big hotel. This is a 540-room hotel. What's it doing with this metal device on the roof? And if it's just there for decorative purposes, why do they make it out of metal? You know, it's very obviously different to the rest of the building. The question is, what's it doing there? Is it just a decoration, or is it actually performing some sort of function?
Yes, it is decoration. You can see them on Biltmore as well. That was the style in the Gilded Age. Plus, what function did it do? It showed that you were wealthy enough to have an elaborate spire like that on the point of your roof. Now, if you're interested, I've put a link in to the full set of blueprints for the Ponce de Leon Hotel. It was built in 1909. There's really nothing mysterious about any of these things. They're decorative, Gilded Age style architecture. So, I want to thank y'all for your patience while I was gone and for stopping by and having a look at this video with me today. We're going to continue our Tartaria Tuesdays starting next Tuesday. We're also going to do some Phuket word videos, and I've got a couple of extra videos to do this week as well. So, guys, take a moment, hit that little like and subscribe button down there. And this is Bob the Science Guy signing out from Northern Michigan. Thank you for stopping by. Take care.